We are joined now by our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, and our political correspondent, Caitlin Huey-Burns. Good to have you both here at the table. Caitlin, I want to start with you. You've been covering abortion access in states around the country, and that's where the decision about access will be made, at the state level. There are 5 states where abortion access is literally on the ballot November the 8th. What's the expectation on whether this election will make access looser or tighter?
Yeah, and in 3 of those states, California, Vermont, Michigan, the question is whether to amend the Constitution to enshrine abortion rights into law. And in the other 2 states, there is either a ban or attempts to criminalize it. But the biggest one I'm watching is in Michigan, that ballot measure, because there's such a competitive governor's race there with Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent, the Democrat, very much campaigning on this issue of abortion access and rights, trying to galvanize her base of support and reach out to those independent suburban women in particular. And it's interesting because Tudor Dixon, who's the Republican running against her, is trying to say to voters, look, you can vote for this measure and also vote against Gretchen Whitmer and vote for me. The biggest question that we've been having this election cycle when it comes to ballot measures is, does this actually translate to support for the Democratic candidate? I was in Kansas covering that ballot measure where we saw overwhelming turnout, where we even saw Republicans vote for it. But that was a direct question to voters. And so when it's on the ballot with candidates, does that have the same effect? And I think Michigan will be an interesting test of that. We're also looking at states like Wisconsin and North Carolina that don't have ballot measures, but the makeup of the state legislatures and other competitive races there could shape how this comes out, because that's really where this is being decided. It's at the state legislative level.
Which is what the court intended.
Sure. I mean, it said that, this is not a federal constitutional issue. This is an issue the state should decide and leave it to the political process. And that's what we're seeing. I think what's interesting, though, is, some of the debate and the outcry among Democrats back in July is kind of receded a bit. I think once people realized the Supreme Court hadn't banned abortion when it overturned Roe versus Wade, and that many state laws weren't really changing at all, it's kind of taken a back seat to issues like crime, inflation, the economy, but it does still have an impact. And then on the flip side, I think it's important to remember for Republicans what that decision has done. Had the court refused to overturn Roe versus Wade, it would have really demoralized a key segment of the Republican base, those voters who care deeply about social issues, the pro-lifers, the evangelicals, people who care about religious liberty. Instead, in overturning Roe, they're galvanized. Those voters are excited, enthusiastic about voting, and that's an important segment for Republicans.
You're also seeing at the national level, where there isn't a law protecting abortion, the conversation from President Biden is, if Democrats win, I will enshrine abortion access, specifically at that 24-week, the language that was in Roe. But then you have Senator Lindsey Graham trying to start the conversation and say it's got to be up until 15 weeks. Is the bottom line that we will just not see any national law, period, that it will stay at the states?
Well, what we're seeing is both sides are using it to galvanize their supporters, right? Democrats are threatening that Republicans get control and then there will be a ban. And Lindsey Graham handed them kind of a gift in saying, look, I would like to implement national restrictions.
Restrictions, but not a ban.
But not an outright ban at 15 weeks. But I think, and you talk to Republicans and they don't want to say at this point, yes, I'm supportive of a national ban, because they don't want to turn voters away that they need to attract here. And it also kind of flies in the face of their argument that this should be a state's issue. But there is no question that this is a base amplifying issue, and Democrats need it.
Jen, I want to ask you about a case that is also getting politicized potentially here, Moore versus Harper. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke about it to a progressive group and said it's about right-wing extremists having a plan to literally steal the next presidential election. That's a big statement. What is this case about, and what's the outcome?
Well, she's talking about a case that the court's going to hear arguments on next month, and it involves this kind of called the independent state legislator theory. And To opponents, that's a radical theory that would really strip state courts from having any oversight into the election laws and procedures that are adopted by state legislatures for federal elections. Now, supporters of this new theory say, well, the federal Constitution gives that power to the state legislatures, not to the state courts. And if you've got a problem, take it to federal court and they can deal with it. The question, I think, is not so much will it directly address things like seating presidential electors. The concern for opponents of this theory, and it is a serious concern that they have, is that if the court adopts this theory, then that sends a message. Katie bar the door. State legislatures can do anything they want, and that, they believe, is dangerous in terms of what they may try to do in some of these election laws and procedures.
Thank you, ladies, for tracking that for us.